Welcome to Unknown, where we explore the bizarre, the mysterious, and sometimes unsettling. I'm Brian Webb with Trenton Hooker, and today we look back at one of the darkest chapters in human history, the Holocaust.
It's been more than 80 years since millions of Jews were systemically slaughtered, with many names still unknown and lost to history. But one researcher has finally solved one of the most notorious mysteries of the Holocaust, the photograph known as The Last Jew of Vinnitsa.
The lone survivor captured on film just before he was executed, but with the help of a lot of digging and artificial intelligence, we now have been able to unmask the killer.
Let's bring in our special guest, Dr. Jürgen Matthäus, the former head of research at the National Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. Dr. Matthäus, so glad to have you here on Unknown.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Let's get into this mystery, the photograph that was so notorious going back to 1941, how you started on the journey of finding out who the killer that executed this man seen in the photograph.
This photo has been known for a long time. It has been heavily used in all media productions, visual or otherwise. And it has been known as you said in the setup, the last Jew in Vinnitsa. And it's clear why the image would be so intriguing. It shows a man sitting at the edge of a pit about to get shot. There are already corpses in the pit. And behind him standing is a shooter in the uniform of the notorious security police and SD, Himmler's killing squads, called the Einsatzgruppen. And he's aiming his handgun right at the neck of that victim. But there's a lot of unknown aspects about this photo, not only who the victim was and the shooter, but also where and when this scene took place. And with a lot of digging, with a lot of help from other colleagues and part of the public, we could now establish that the setting is not Vinnitsa, still in Ukraine, in Bellingcat, which is about 50 miles north of Vinnitsa. And the date is late July 1941, to be exact, the 28th of July 1941.
Immer tiefer geht es in die Ukraine hinein. Brennende Häuser und zerstörte Waffen kennzeichnen wie überall den Weg des bolschewistischen Rückzuges.
Doctor, talk to me a little bit about, you touched on it, but why this picture? It's a notorious, infamous picture, but why did you want to sink your teeth into this picture so much?
Images are tricky. Photographs, historical photographs are tricky for historians to use because they often come with no information or very sketchy information as to what they actually show, where they come from, and what scene is depicted, dated, in terms of dating and other such things. So it's a complicated source format, more complicated partly or with different problems attached than written documents and other sources that historians use. So this one particularly photo had been intriguing. And again, the media usage is heavy. The usage also in the Holocaust Museum's archive of that photo was quite heavy. And I was very fortunate to be able to see a document that had just been received by the Holocaust Museum a couple of years ago. And that document was the war diary, part of a series of diaries by a Wehrmacht captain by the name of Walter Materna. He had this photo loosely attached to his diary, inserted into his diary. And not only this, he also added the date and the place and the fact that this was an execution by the SS in Bellingcat on the back of that photo in handwriting. He also added a diary entry to that effect, where he is reporting what a comrade of his, as he describes him, told him about witnessing that scene. So Materna himself was not an eyewitness to the shooting, but he reports what that eyewitness told him. And that is very close to the scene you see in front of you in that photo.
And Jürgen, if you could explain, of course, the research paper that you did complete in 2024, I believe, and you published your work talking about the photo with the diary as well, building that story and putting it out there. And then you were contacted by someone who said that they believe that the man seen holding the gun, the SS officer, might be a family member with their wife's family, correct?
Correct. So what we know now, it came to us in stages. My first publication was indeed about that new finding of this diary that now gave us not only a very sharp image, a very sharp copy of that notorious photo, but also the contextual information. I could find additional contextual information in the photo album of another soldier who was in Bellingcat at the same time and came up with similar photos, more blurry, not as sharp as the one that we know from Materna. So this was step one, and I published on that finding in the journal Holocaust and Genocide Studies in early 2024. And as you said, there was indeed reaction, and the reaction came from a German media print newspaper article that featured this finding. And a German reader approached me and wrote to the effect that he had been suspicious of the shooter for a long time, in terms of suspecting that the shooter in the photo was indeed a distant relative of his wife. And as it turned out, over back and forth and communicating with the man and his wife over many months, it turned out that he had accumulated a lot of material on that distant family member. And based on the photographs that my contact had collected, it was possible to have comparable images that allowed for the identification of the shooter. And we now know that this is a man by the name of Jakobus Onnen, born in a small village in eastern Frisia in northwestern Germany, close to the Dutch border. The man did not survive the war. He was killed in anti-partisan warfare in August 1943, which is one of the reasons why he never became known to investigators who were investigating the crimes of the Einsatzgruppen. But it is clear that he was part of the Einsatzgruppen and that he's the man in the photo with a very high likelihood that he's the man.
So that's the headline right there. We now know who was the gunman in that infamous photo. Tell us a little bit more about what you know of this man, Onen, a teacher, a young man. How did he end up with a gun in his hand in this picture?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because he doesn't have a background that would make him an extremely likely candidate to be among these killers. What we know from the Einsatzgruppen members, many of them, particularly the officers, had a long history of involvement, not only in the SS and in the police, but also with Nazi ideology. Committed Nazis or opportunists or both. In the case of Onnen, it's a little different. So as you said, he is a teacher by training. He had taught at what was called then the German colonial school in a small town in Germany. And then at the beginning of the war, he gets seconded to a teaching position in the order police, which is another branch of the police under Heinrich Himmler, the SS chief. And from there, he is moved to the Einsatzgruppen at the beginning of the campaign against the Soviet Union, which starts on the 22nd of June 1941. How that exactly happened, we are not exactly sure. The fact is, however, that obviously, as the photo attests to, he was very quickly socialized to the behavior of these units. We know that everyone was not only encouraged, but in a way almost forced to participate in the shootings. For some members of the Einsatzgruppen, there was no force required because they were eager to participate themselves. So there was a group pressure involved here. there was part of the socialization clearly in his upbringing had to do with his support of Nazi ideology. The little that we have by him by way of writing before the war is not that explicit. It's very much it very much has the atmosphere and the tone of many of these letters and other texts that were written at the time. Doesn't necessarily make for a committed murderer as he comes across here in that photo. So it remains mysterious what exactly are the motives of his involvement. And in fact, motivation is one of the biggest unknowns, if you like, when it comes to the involvement of perpetrators into the Holocaust. In many cases, it is a mix of different factors.
And if you could, Jürgen, I know you were explaining there about the death squads in this time period with Operation Barbarossa, where they would go in and they would target the Jews and then other minority groups in the Soviet Union. Can you please explain just, you touched on there where Onen, of course, had this background as a teacher, where it is a little strange how he became a member of this death squad, but how a lot of the SS men were, these ordinary men where they were German citizens being tasked with going and doing these horrendous things.
Yeah, ordinary men is a term that probably doesn't apply with regard to the Einsatzgruppen members. These were people who were highly socialized to the Nazi ideology. And as I said, most of them at least, Onnen not included here, into the SS apparatus. The training in the SS, and particularly in the police force, was directed by Himmler. He wanted to make sure that everyone is in line with the regime's goals. The goal at the beginning of the campaign against the Soviet Union was to eliminate as many potential enemies of the Reich as possible. The entire campaign was designed as a campaign of annihilation by Hitler in conjunction with the Wehrmacht leadership.
Die Bolschewisten weichen auch hier nur Schritt um Schritt zurück. Dem Angriffsschwung unserer Soldaten aber ist kein Widerstand gewachsen.
Well, Jürgen, if you could hang with us for just one moment, we're actually going to take a break. And then when we come back, we'd really like to get into of course, solving the mystery with the use of Bellingcat, the AI tool that was responsible for that. And then unlocking these mysteries that we think are lost to history, but with technology and with, of course, collaboration with others, seems like they're finally getting some sunlight.
All right.
We'll be right back.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to Unknown. I'm Trenton Hooker, joined by Brian Webb. And today we have a very special guest, Dr. Jürgen Matthäus, joining us from Germany. We're talking about the Holocaust and solving one of the greatest mysteries, at least photographically, of the war and of the Holocaust. And Jürgen, you were talking about with the identity of the photographer, how that is still a mystery, but the culture, at least, of photographing these atrocities, keeping them as keepsakes in photo albums, that was rampant in the SS, and of course in the years to come after the war.
Yes, indeed. Rampant not only in the SS, which was the prime killing squad, but also among other Germans, men as well as women, as much as we know about that. Of course, you have primarily German men deployed in these areas of the Eastern Front. But yeah, there was a proliferation of imagery that was taken by German photographers. In many instances, when we see photos like this, like the one that shows Onen, we do not know the photographer.
And I was just going to ask you a follow-up on that too. It almost seems like these photo albums were kept as, one might with pornography or some other salacious material, to where they want to keep these intimate moments and, to share them around in that culture.
What does that say?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think the comparison is apt. This is spectacular stuff you want to hang on to. It's a trophy. We see these images now as iconic But iconic for us, that means they are iconic for the crimes committed. They were already iconic at the time when they were taken for many of the Germans, but they saw them as trophy documents that attested to them performing well in a historic situation. By waging war and participating in winning the war that Germany was waging against the Soviet Union. So there's a completely different reading of that material at the time by those who took these photos. There's often an affirmative meaning ascribed to any text that comes with these photos. Sometimes it's written on the back of these photos. Sometimes it's in albums. Particularly more, if you like, harmless images that depict people in the East as it was seen at the time. And here you had one of the classic topics here is Jews in the East. And they are almost always depicted as typical Jews.
Die faulenzenden Juden werden sofort zu den Aufräumungsarbeiten herangezogen.
So you have here a confluence of what Nazi ideology tries to, and propaganda tries to convey to the people in the Reich and beyond, and the reception and the perception of Germans who are actually then out there in the East, and they see confirmed what in many cases at least, what the regime is conveying to them, that these are different people, completely different, that the entire setting is so different from the home country. There is no culture, there is violence, people are dangerous. And that is a key aspect of the mentality that people, Germans, men and women, brought to the East when they got there in 1941.
And speaking of women, Doctor, I'm always curious about the wives and maybe mothers who often set men straight when they're doing wrong. What do we know about Jakobus Onnen? Did he have a wife? And how were these wives? Were they along those lines turning a blind eye to this? Did they not fully know what was going on? What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. He was married. He married shortly before the beginning of the war. And presumably he wrote letters to his family, including his wife. Unfortunately, none of these letters have survived the war. That's not untypical. Many of these letters, particularly if they had included anything incriminating, were destroyed after the war, or even if they were just deemed to have something incriminating in them, they were destroyed. But we do have sources that attest to communication between spouses, partners. And in one instance, there was a German order policeman deployed early in the war in Lithuania, and he is sending a photo of himself roughing up two Jews in the city while he is on duty as a policeman. He sends that to his wife and basically asks her, "What do you think about this?" And she comes back with voicing her astonishment that this doesn't really look like you, but after all, what these people have done, these beasts, as she calls them in her letter to him, it's understandable. So you can see here a mechanism of affirmation between partners, in this case, in a marriage, that ensures that the men in the field are working and also properly according to the regime's expectations.
Doctor, thank you for that answer, too. I'm curious about the AI part of this. How did you end up realizing that, hey, I might be able to identify this man by using artificial intelligence, and how that all came together?
Right. So that's the one response that I got from the distant relative provided the key aspects here for going about the story and trying to research more. And that were images of Jakobus Onnen that showed him at around the same time or shortly before, so that they were comparable images. The other contact I got was from a member of the Bellingcat group of volunteers who are usually dealing with much more current events and not so much with historic images. The reason is also that analog sources like photographs don't really lend themselves all that well to this kind of technological investigation. However, him and the group made a massive effort to compare, and the technology confirmed basically what more traditional methods of facial recognition, and also the suspicion of the person who had contacted me, the relative, had already surmised, namely that this is indeed Jakobus Onnen. So the likelihood that is identified by AI is in the range of 99%. And I've been told it doesn't get any better than that for historical images.
I do want to ask on the identity of the victim seen in that photograph. Do we know who that person is, that man? Do we know his nationality even, that this was in Ukraine, that he was a Ukrainian Jew that was there?
Well, I'm really glad you asked, because I've noticed in the media coverage that has been really far and wide all over the world about this story, very, very little interest was taken in the identity of the victim. In the article that I've published recently about the name of the perpetrator, I also described the efforts that were supported by the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum quite massively to find and ascertain the identity of the victim. And the museum had supported a project that really seems extremely unlikely in its chances for success. And I describe it to you a little bit because I think it's really interesting. So in the absence of any comparable photographs, we had a researcher based in Ukraine who is, under current conditions, as you can imagine, extremely difficult ones, going through archival records in the relevant archive in Zhytomyr in Ukraine, and is looking for images from the pre-German occupation period of the Soviet administration. So any files that had images, photographs, passports, and otherwise were of potential relevance because they might show the man who's in the picture. Now, again, the chances for this were extremely low, and we knew that from the beginning. However, the effort itself, I think, is remarkable, and the achievement, I think, is also remarkable by finding so many biographic snippets, not of the man in the picture in all likelihood. That's at least what AI tells us. There is no match here. But the biographies, many of whom are of Jews in Ukraine, and about them very little remains known. And many of them will have become victims of the Holocaust if they ended up in the region when the Germans occupied. So this is an ongoing problem. How can we find the identity of the victim? I tried also to look at oral histories that were compiled well after the war, including material by the Shoah Foundation. People often there show images, often from their family. None that I could ascertain from any Jews coming from Vinnitsa, Bellingcat, showed that photo and said, this is someone I know.
Jürgen, I want to ask finally, too, where trying to right these wrongs of history, at least in the way that we tell them historically, in the war monument in Onen's hometown, his name did appear previously to your work on a war memorial to saying "our victims," and his name appeared there. Now, you had mentioned that the mayor did try to right that, but can you talk about that effort, and then more importantly, with looking back on this dark moment in history, with the way that we tell it, especially in an age where people deny that the Holocaust even happened?
Yes, I mean, your series is called Unknown, and here we are facing one of the biggest unknown that might seem a little bit surprising almost 80 years after the events. Many of the perpetrators appear on these German memorials dedicated to either the war victims or sometimes the victims. In the case of Vienna, the hometown of Onen in East Frisia, it's our victims. So in this case, the mayor and some active citizens who were very much involved in recapitulating the history of the lost Jewish community in town, were very quick to respond to the publication about the findings that show that Onnen is the shooter here. It's not obliterated. You can see that there is the name, but instead of the name, you get a QR code. If you go on the QR code, anyone who does that on site can see that there is a photo and that Onnen is involved in that shooting scene. So I think this is an example of how it should be done. But it's not done across the country, and one of the biggest omissions in German society and by also historians was to look into the issue how war criminals get lumped up with war victims. And in the case of Onnens, it's blatantly clear. There are many other memorials, I would assume, in Germany where this is an issue. So I think there is more to uncover. And indeed, this is a big effort that so far also research has shied away from. And I think it's time to get into that.
Fascinating stuff, Doctor. Doctor, we appreciate your time. Dr. Jürgen Matthäus, former lead researcher at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. We appreciate your time, sir.
My pleasure.
Pleasure, sir. Thank you.
See you next time on Unknown.
No.